Rockers Tween Scene. Party Rockers recently viewed the documentary Blackfish, and let me just say, it is both beautiful and horrific. Anyone who thinks killer whales are happy at SeaWorld or support SeaWorld need to see this film. Today, we are interviewing Dr. Jeffrey Ventry, a former SeaWorld trainer. Dr. Ventry is now working as a medical doctor. He was featured in this film and provides us an inside look at the torture these whales suffer daily. Thank you, Dr. Ventry, for allowing us to interview you. And thank you for speaking up for orcas and all cetaceans in captivity. Thank you. Although we call them killer whales, are orcas or not whales at all, correct?
Yeah, orcas are the largest member of the family of animals known as Delphinidae, which is dolphins. So they're the biggest dolphins. That's correct.
Where is the best place tweens and teens can learn more about orcas and their behavior in the wild?
Well, there's a lot of museums that have cetacean displays, so you can go to museums all over the country, but I think the best place is in Washington State. If people fly to Seattle, then they can take a ferry boat up to the San Juan Islands. It's a beautiful ferry boat ride, and then they can either stay on shore and just look out over the Haro Strait, or they can get on a whale watching boat, and guess what? It's cheaper than paying an admission to SeaWorld to see wild killer whales. So I can't understand why everybody wouldn't just do that and get the real thing, because when you're in the wild, like is said in the movie, you get to watch them swimming in straight lines, and they have very tall, straight dorsal fins, and they seem much happier in Washington State. So if you're in the U.S., I'd go to Washington. If you're in Canada, you can go to Vancouver Island or Victoria, BC, or someplace like that. That's the best place.
Awesome, so cool. Do you think SeaWorld intentionally hires younger people who are more willing to believe the false science that they promote?
I think SeaWorld is just another theme park, and the theme park industry is notorious for hiring low-paid, unskilled workers. I also think that the less educated, so even myself included, or the younger a person is when they get hired, the more kind of, they can be shaped by the management. They're a little bit more clueless. When I got hired by SeaWorld, I didn't know anything about wild killer whales and dolphins. I just believed everything that SeaWorld told me. And it was only after being there for several years that I started to recognize some of the signs of captivity myself. And so I agree with you. Yeah, they would rather have someone that doesn't know much to hire than someone that already knows all about whales in the wild. Because why would you want to work in a place that promotes keeping killer whales in captivity if you already know that they're not very suited for captivity?
What was the defining moment for you? When did you know you would be a voice for the orcas?
Well, it didn't take long. Probably, I was at SeaWorld, and I started to realize that I wasn't going to be able to stay there for life. And so I went back to school while I was still at SeaWorld, and now I'm a medical doctor. But, various people get hired and figure it out at different times. For me, it was when I went back to the killer whale stadium called Shamu Stadium the second time around, and I started to realize that the animals were A, dying young, B, they were breaking their teeth off on the steel bars that separate them, C, we were putting black zinc oxide on their back to cover up their sunburn, and D, they had floppy dorsal fins, and E, we were having to flush out their teeth every day with a betadine and saline solution just so they didn't get an infection. So there were a lot of indicators that I picked up on, and it was the second time I went to Shamu Stadium.
Wow, that's very sad. After watching the film, we know that SeaWorld is lying to the public and giving out false information. We know that dorsal fin collapse is not normal. That in the wild, orcas can swim up to 1,000 miles per day, live in family groups, and are highly social and intelligent. Orcas, despite what SeaWorld would have you believe, do not live longer in captivity. SeaWorld is kidnapping these orcas, ripping them from their families, and forcing them to perform daily for dead fish. But what what we don't know, Dr. Ventry, is how can we, as the next generation, help?
Okay, those are good questions, and I just want to say that the orcas swim up to 100 miles a day. I just wanted to make one little correction. But what we can all do is, you know, you guys are all stoked and excited, and we're having this conversation. And right now, what we're doing is we're spreading the word. Right now, we're still in the phase of the operation where we've got to reach a certain number of people in the society and get the same message that Blackfish has out to them. And that's what the three of us are doing right now. So what we're doing is spreading the word. And then after everyone understands that orcas aren't suited in captivity, we've got to change the laws, and we've got to enforce the laws that are already on the books. For example, we all know that Lolita is in an illegal tank and is also a member of an endangered subset of killer whales known as the southern residents. But no one enforces the fact that she's in an undersized tank. So number one, we need to press our leaders into enforcing the rules that are already on the books. And number two, make new laws. One thing that I'd like to see change is I'd like to see cetaceans and elephants and certain other species get granted non-human personhood legal status, because right now the animals are treated like property, and that gives people like SeaWorld or John Holler at Marineland in Canada basically ownership rights over these animals. And how absurd is it to say, I own a killer whale? No one can own a killer whale. These animals belong to the planet and to their families, and for a company to be able to trade, borrow, hijack, pull away from their mother these killer whales is a ridiculous concept. So I think granting these animals a little bit of protection under the law is what the future holds. And so I encourage all of your viewers to use your computers and Google the website the Non-Human Rights Project. And there's also a Twitter feed called @NonHumanRights. Everybody can start following the Non-Human Rights Project, and it's based upon the work of an attorney named Steve Wise. And he's going to try a case with a chimpanzee where they're going to try to get the chimpanzee more protection under the law. So we can change the law, we can enforce the law, we can give them a higher legal status, and we can all continue to work together using Skype and webinars and social media to spread the word. So I want to thank you ladies for helping spread the word right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will totally do that. We will very much do that. Dr. Ventry, we cannot thank you enough for this interview.
Oh, well, thank you ladies. I'm happy to be here.
How can we put pressure on SeaWorld to end their breeding program and stop the sea circus?
One thing that we can do is not buy a ticket to SeaWorld and force them to change their business model. It's going to be very hard to stop them from breeding animals, because I believe what they're trying to do is breed as many as they can before captivity becomes illegal or less tolerated in the USA, so then they can ship more killer whales to places like Europe and Asia, which is what they did with Laurel Parquet in the movie. You know, they have 4 or 5 whales now at this theme park in the Canary Islands of Spain, where the laws are even less than what they are in the United States. So I think it's just going to have to be people being very vocal about it, using public pressure, using the media to help them be accountable for what they're doing, and just really stress the fact that these young female killer whales would not have a baby in the wild until age 13 or 14, but SeaWorld is forcing them to have babies and breeding them as early as 5 years of age. That is unethical and it's immoral. They shouldn't be having babies that young. They don't know how to be proper mothers, and that's why in the captivity these young orca mothers are rejecting some of their calves, because they're not properly trained yet. It's like a young girl having a baby when she's not ready. So I think SeaWorld needs to be pressured into stop breeding these animals.
Yes, I agree. I will never buy a ticket. You are changing the way people view orcas and helping them understand captivity kills.
It does. Captivity does kill. I wrote a paper with Dr. John Jett called Keto and Tilikum Express the Stress of Orca Captivity that you can read online. And I hope everyone will read it, because it's got a lot of information about how stress leads to early death and injury in captivity. And one of the things that we did in this paper was we came up with a statistic called the mean duration of captivity and also the median duration of captivity. And what we did is we added up all the whales that have lived and died and continue to live in captivity. And we averaged up all of their lifespans once they enter that environment. And what we found out was pretty astounding. And that is, if you average them all up, they don't even live to 10 years once they enter captivity. Now, think about that. Tilikum, Ulysses, Lolita, Corky, and a couple other whales are long-lived for captivity standards and have made it to live over 30 years in captivity. But that's only like a half dozen. There have been 200 whales, over 200 whales that have been put and lived and died in captivity. And when you average all of them together, they don't even live to be 10 years of age. And that is an astounding figure, especially in the wild when there's a whale named Granny or J2 that's alive right now in the Pacific Northwest that we know is 102 years old. One of the unique things about killer whales in the wild is that the females, just like human females, reach menopause, and then they have a very long post-menopausal life. And that is because orca societies are matriarchal, and guess what? The ladies are in charge in the orca world, and maybe that's what it needs to be on the planet. So when you ladies grow up, you're going to have to be in charge. How does that sound?
Yeah. But that is so awful. Wow.
It is
so
awful.
horrible. It's terrible.
It is terrible. They're breeding these young babies, and the whales are dying young, and it needs to come to an end because it is immoral, and it is inhumane, and it is unjust. And we need to change it, and I appreciate you ladies putting this Party Rockers Tween Scene together.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.